Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Huo Yuhao returned from his contemplation and said, "We should go back as quickly as possible. The Star Luo Empire isn't being aggressively pressured by the Sun Moon Empire on this side after all, and they can stabilize themselves for the time being. However, the Heavenly Soul Empire is probably in deep trouble. With the death god Doluo around, I don't think the Star Luo Empire can be that effective even if they push into the Sun Moon Empire's territory. The Academy probably has to make other plans." Shu Sanxia said, "All right. You don't have to worry about so much, your recovery is most important. Stop talking and take a rest." "All right." Huo Yuhao shut his eyes once more and quietly felt the changes in his body. Huo Yuhao's body had almost exploded from the pressure after he overused the beast god, Di Qian's strength, but all that wasn't without benefit. The beast god was controlling him back then, but Huo Yuhao's consciousness was still very much awake. Therefore, he could entirely feel how frighteningly powerful the beast god's power was. That was what it felt like to be an ultimate Doluo. This experience undoubtedly allowed Huo Yuhao to feel the aura of a top-tier individual before he had attained the necessary power and cultivation. Huo Yuhao could even feel that the beast god had infused about 80% of his true body's soul power into him. Huo Yuhao's passageways were all saturated when that happened, and his tremendous life energy couldn't keep up with the terrifyingly destructive power. This was the case even after the reverse scale that the beast god had given him bore the brunt of the pressure. This part of his memory was very vivid and deep for him. He realized back then that Di Qian's soul power was different from his. Huo Yuhao was a soul sage, and his soul power was like sticky liquid that circulated as and how he wanted. His soul power's density, purity, regenerative effects, and sustainability were all relatively good. However, Di Qian's soul power was like tiny black holes connected together, and every black hole contained frightening spatial power, while each unique space contained unimaginably terrifying strength. Everything was within Di Qian's control. Huo Yuhao had thought to himself back then, is that the power of an ultimate Doluo? It was very difficult for the human body to contain such terrifying and extraordinary soul power, and humans would have to rely on spatial power to contain their soul power. Furthermore, that spatial power had to take effect within one's own body. Everything was just so strange and mystical. Di Qian mentioned spatial power when he was battling Yi Shishui, and it was evident that she wasn't as good with spatial power as Di Qian was. They were both some of the most powerful individuals in the world, but there was still quite a gap between them. Huo Yuhao could feel that if Di Qian's true body was present, Yi Shishui would still ultimately be no match for Di Qian even if she leveraged the Death Pagoda. Di Qian wasn't known as the most powerful individual in the world for no reason. Huo Yuhao had told his four spirits that his future aim was to challenge the beast god and ultimately defeat him, before he would attempt to sense the core from the god realm. Huo Yuhao realized after his experience that he still had a long way to go. He was just too far away in comparison to the most powerful individuals in the world. Huo Yuhao was rare prodigy. However, which individual who could become a title Doluo wasn't a prodigy? Yi Shishui, Mu Yan, and Long Xiaoyao were all the most talented individuals of their generation. Huo Yuhao still had a long way to go if he wanted to catch up with them, much less surpass them. Di Qian's power replayed in his mind. Huo Yuhao didn't feel discouraged because of it. Instead, an intense desire was ignited in his heart, the desire to become more powerful, to become stronger. Furthermore, for some reason, he realized after he had passed out twice that his spiritual state would improve every time he came to. During both times when he was unconscious, he felt as if Dharma had returned to his side, and that sensation felt extremely real. If it can be like that every time I pass out, then I don't mind even if I have to pass out every day. Huo Yuhao continued to think as the corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile. He channeled his spiritual power and looked inward at his current state. The passageways in his body were reconnected, and dense life energy flourished through them, while his blood was flowing very smoothly. His soul power began to recover by itself after his passageways healed, and that was the strength of his body. Di Qian's strength wasn't something that just anyone could take. He had used his body as a foundation in battle, and even if another title Doluo was in his place, he or she probably wouldn't be in as good a shape as Huo Yuhao was. Even a title Doluo could explode from all the pressure, let alone a soul sage like Huo Yuhao. Huo Yuhao's reconnected passageways had become green from all that life energy nourishing them. There was no question that more of that tremendous life energy originated from his Life Guardian blade than his own veins. The Life Guardian blade had evolved completely after it consumed the life gold. It was a small carving knife at the start, but it had evolved into a dagger. It was nourished continuously within Huo Yuhao's body, and even Di Qian couldn't feel its existence. Di Qian had used his own strength to protect Huo Yuhao's organs when his body was severely hurt. Damaged passageways weren't much, and the power in Huo Yuhao's veins was enough for his passageways to recover by themselves. However, Huo Yuhao would be in deep trouble if his organs had erupted. What Di Qian didn't know was that the power of Huo Yuhao's Life Guardian blade was unleashed once more when it was guided by the immortal Dr. Doluo's life energy. That pure life energy had baptized Huo Yuhao's body once more. Its effects this time were almost the same as when Huo Yuhao had first fused with it. His damaged passageways contained even more life energy. His healed passageways became tougher, and were filled with even more life energy. If this state continued, Huo Yuhao felt that he could return to normal after just 3 more days at the most. The experience of fighting against the death god was exceptionally precious for him. At the same time, he understood that the protection that the beast god's reverse scale conferred to him wasn't absolute. He was lucky this time. If Ishishure hadn't been overly sensitive, he probably would have been in deep trouble, just as he would be if he was faced with an individual as powerful as an ultimate Doluo. Even if he was faced with a normal title Doluo, his body would be severely injured from the burden it would have to take even if the beast god defeated the title Doluo for him. Thinking about everything in hindsight was scary, but all this wasn't a bad thing for Huo Yuhao, because at least he was able to judge how much strength the beast god could channel into his body, and how much his body could take. This would be very beneficial for his attempts to utilize the beast god's power in the future. The beast god didn't just do bad things after he had bestowed the reverse scale upon him, he finally did something good. However, Huo Yuhao still reminded himself constantly that he wouldn't draw upon the beast god's power if he could afford it. Otherwise, he would develop a reliance on it, and that would hinder his future improvements and cultivation. Soul power continued circulating within his body. Huo Yuhao used his spiritual power to control a small part of his soul power, before he circulated it in his dantian. Huo Yuhao recounted again and again how it was like when the beast god had channeled soul power into his body. If he could create a black hole like that, would his cultivation improve more quickly? Even if his cultivation didn't improve, what would it be like for his explosiveness in battle? Huo Yuhao began to circulate that thread of soul power in his dantian as he contemplated. He whirled and compressed it. This seemed like where the beast god's secret lay, except utilizing spatial power was still a mystery for him. This thread of soul power wasn't that powerful, but it began to whirl increasingly quickly as Huo Yuhao deliberately controlled it with his spiritual power. This soul power was gradually compressed. From the beginning, it was like a fist, but it was gradually compressed into the size of a chicken egg, and then a hawthorn. Huo Yuhao could clearly feel that his liquid soul power felt like it was going to solidify after it had reached that level. Its rotation speed began to slow down due to the compression process. What's happening? Is my method wrong? But Di Qian's soul power was clearly formed by small black holes that were rotating at high speed. Every black hole contained spatial power and immense soul power. Is there something wrong with how I'm compressing the soul power? Huo Yuhao infused even more spiritual power as he contemplated, and forced that soul power to continue rotating more quickly. However, he was careful not to compress it anymore. Huo Yuhao could gradually feel that something wasn't right. This thread of soul power was rotating even more quickly from his full effort, but solid grains began to appear in it. Those grains began to absorb the rest of the soul power inside his dantian, as they rotated so that they could strengthen themselves. Those whirlpools that had been compressed to the size of hawthorns began to enlarge once more. No. Huo Yuhao immediately sensed that something wasn't right. He instantly increased his control over his spiritual power, so that he could make the whirlpools rotate slower. That was him. If another soul sage was in his place, that person couldn't possibly have extra spiritual power after adjusting his or her control over their soul power time and time again. The soul power's rotation speed slowed, and its absorption of external soul power naturally weakened. Its volume stopped increasing, but the solidified soul power also began to slowly melt and become liquid once more. Finally, the thread of soul power returned to normal under Huo Yuhao's careful control, and returned all the soul power in his dantian. It continued circulating according to the mysterious heaven technique's cultivation pathways. Huo Yuhao was utterly confused after his experiment. He couldn't possibly ask the beast god, as Di Qian would be extremely happy that his soul power was increasing more slowly. How could Di Qian possibly tell him such a secret? However, the way Di Qian was circulating his own soul power left a deep impression in Huo Yuhao's mind, and he could faintly feel that this way of circulating soul power was the method that he would ultimately reach. Doing experiments on his body here was far too dangerous. A single misstep would be equivalent to creating a bomb in his body. Huo Yuhao decided that, after his body had recovered, he would channel his soul power out of his body and control it outside. That should be no problem with his spiritual power. At the very least, he had to figure out the secret of how soul power and spatial power fused together. He would have to ask Elder Xian for the rest after he returned to the academy. Even though Elder Xian wasn't an ultimate Doluo, he was still a rank 98 transcendent Doluo after all, so he should also be working in the same direction. His body was getting better by the second, and his passageways were repairing themselves continuously. Huo Yuhao could get out of bed himself by nightfall. However, he didn't get to eat much for dinner due to his physical state. He ate a large bowl of nourishing meat soup and some noodles that were cooked until they were very soft. Everyone from Shrek, who was sitting in the canteen, glanced at Huo Yuhao again and again. What a miracle! What was happening to Huo Yuhao's body was simply a miracle. He was someone whose passageways were almost completely shattered. Not only did he not die, but it had only been 3 or 4 days, and he could already get up and walk. What was that if not a miracle? They would have inferred that he had an undying body if they hadn't known him so well. Shu Sanxia stared at Huo Yuhao's pale expression and said, "Yuhao, who are you going to assign to take care of you tonight?" Yi Gai and Nan Qiuqiu blushed when they heard his words. Tang Wutong was drinking her soup, and her spoon quivered faintly as she spilled some soup back into her bowl. Huo Yuhao smiled and said, "There's no need. We are inside the Northwestern Field Army's main camp, and we are very safe. I can move around by myself too, so I don't need someone to take care of me. Thank you, everyone, for the past few days, and I know I've also worried you. My body will completely recover after 2 more days, and then we can return to the academy." Yi Gai and Nan Qiuqiu seemed a little dejected when they heard him say that he didn't need anyone to take care of him, because that meant that they no longer had any chances to be close to him. Tang Wutong heaved a deep sigh of relief. She didn't even take a single glance at Huo Yuhao throughout dinner. Every time she thought about wiping and cleaning Huo Yuhao the previous night, she would be uncontrollably embarrassed. She couldn't even regret it. Why did I help him do something like that the other night? That's just unbelievable. Shu Sanxia glanced at all 3 ladies, and a strange smile appeared on his face. "All right, then you have to be careful tonight. Right, Wutong is very near you, and you can call her if you feel that something is wrong with your body. She should be able to hurry over as soon as possible, right, Wutong?" "Ah?" Tang Wutong raised her head and looked at Shu Sanxia, and then at Huo Yuhao. Her expression was clearly a little rigid as she nodded. Huo Yuhao thought she wasn't very willing as he watched her expression, and hurriedly said, "It's all right, Wutong. I don't think I'll have to trouble you." "Yes," Tang Wutong acknowledged before she lowered her head once more. Everyone returned to their tents to rest after dinner. The Northwestern Field Army's camp was very empty at this moment, as most of the army had already been deployed into the Mingdo mountain range. The White Tiger Duke and Princess Jojo had to direct everything over there, so they weren't around either. Huo Yuhao's body felt a lot better, as he crossed his legs and sat on his bed. His passageways had reconnected completely, and the next thing he had to do was get used to his new passageways. At the same time, he had to let his passageways consolidate and strengthen themselves with nourishment from his life energy. They should be able to recover completely by then. Life gold is truly a mystical existence. Huo Yuhao controlled the life guardian blade with his mind as green light flickered, and it suddenly appeared in front of him and hovered in the air, point down. The room was a little dim, but the dagger's appearance instantly tainted everything with green hues. Green light weaved around the room as dense life energy rippled. Huo Yuhao waved his hand, and the dagger ended up in his grip. The blade wasn't very long, about 7 inches, and the grip was about 4 inches long. The life guardian blade could only be considered a small dagger. However, Huo Yuhao immediately felt a thick wave of life energy fill his body as he gripped the dagger, and everything in his body shone with green colors. He leapt down from his bed and removed a tough piece of metal from his storage ring. Huo Yuhao swung the dagger in his hand, and green light flashed over the metal before it vanished into thin air just like that, as if it had never existed. A beam of light flashed on the life guardian blade, and it didn't change much, but Huo Yuhao could feel that it now contained some life energy inside that didn't belong to it. Huo Yuhao used his mind once more, and the golden dragon spear flew out from his eye of destiny. The life guardian blade pressed against the golden dragon spear, and the golden dragon spear flickered and absorbed that life energy that belonged to some other object. Something occurred to Huo Yuhao, just as Wang Qiu'er had said before. The life guardian blade and the golden dragon spear were clearly complementary to each other. Life energy absorbed by the golden dragon spear could sustain the life guardian blade, while life energy absorbed by the life guardian blade from objects could be used to replenish the golden dragon spear. If these two items could be completely fused together, then their strengths would be improved, perhaps their strengths would even be increased to a frightening level. The life guardian blade belonged to him, while the golden dragon spear belonged to Wang Qiu'er, so he couldn't attempt something like this before. Furthermore, the life guardian blade was just a small carving knife back then, and its volume was too small. But now, the blade's bulk had increased, and both items belonged to Huo Yuhao. Could he attempt this now? Huo Yuhao pinched the golden dragon spear's tip as he contemplated, before he pressed it against the life guardian blade's grip. The life guardian blade shone with faint green light, while the golden dragon spear radiated faint ripples of golden light. Those lights intertwined and fused with each other. I can't just tie them together, can I? A simple connection like that cannot unleash their potential as contemporary to each other. What do I have to do for this to work? Huo Yuhao was stuck. He could sense that his choice was right, but how he should fuse them together was another tough question. Huo Yuhao frowned as he descended into deep thought. The life guardian blade radiated tremendous life energy, while the golden dragon spear seemed a lot more reserved. There seemed to be golden light flowing inside the golden dragon spear's deep golden hue. Perhaps that was because it had tasted the blood of many, and the spear itself effused a somber and desolate aura. Both items had the same characteristic of absorbing life energy, but they were different in that the life guardian blade absorbed life energy from objects and converted it into life energy that humans or animals needed, while the golden dragon spear did the opposite. How could these two be fused together? Huo Yuhao continued contemplating as he pressed both items together, and he deeply felt their transformations as they were pressed against each other. Huo Yuhao quickly discovered that neither changed too much when they were pressed together. They didn't reject each other, but they didn't attract each other either. They seemed like two distinct objects that couldn't be simpler, and nothing much happened when they were pressed together. Huo Yuhao took out another piece of metal. He allowed the life guardian blade to absorb its life energy. Yes, something began to change. The life guardian blade flashed once before golden light circulated around the golden dragon spear. However, this didn't take longer than an instant before the two items finished interacting. Seems like I can't forcefully fuse them together. At least, I don't have the ability to do so at this point. Huo Yuhao shook his head exasperatedly. His eye of destiny flickered and reabsorbed the golden dragon spear. Right at this moment, an idea struck him: if he didn't have the ability to fuse them together, could they fuse together through destiny within his Eye of Destiny? The Eye of Destiny contained the mystical power of destiny, and that was a power that not even the beast god, Di Qian, could understand. The beast god couldn't detect the life guardian blade's existence before this because it was contained within Huo Yuhao's Eye of Destiny. Huo Yuhao had stored and nourished both items in his Eye of Destiny separately before this, and he didn't try letting them interact with each other. What if he changed his methods? With that, Huo Yuhao immediately reabsorbed the life guardian blade into his Eye of Destiny, and he controlled and shifted it so that it was placed in the same place as the golden dragon spear. He didn't feel anything special. They were both under the influence of the power of destiny, but they were just sitting there calmly. They were no different from how they were on the outside. Huo Yuhao wasn't worried, as he knew that good things only came to those who waited. For him, both items fusing together could possibly give him an unexpected surprise, while it would be nothing much for him even if those items didn't fuse. They were both Huo Yuhao's trump cards on their own. Huo Yuhao finished dealing with the two things that could almost be considered godly weapons, and his thoughts returned to his recollection of Di Qian's soul power. His body hadn't completely recovered at this moment, but his spiritual power had almost completely recovered. Soul power also flourished in his body. Huo Yuhao didn't dare to experiment within his body, because he would be in big trouble if something went amiss. However, everything was different outside his body. Even though Huo Yuhao knew that he should wait until his body had fully recovered before undergoing this experiment, he couldn't resist the temptation right now. His desire for power and strength became even stronger after facing off against Yi Shishui, and understanding and grasping the secret to Di Qian's soul power would undoubtedly be very helpful for his improvements in cultivation. Huo Yuhao thought for a moment before he decided to begin his experiment. He was doing it externally anyway, and he wouldn't hurt himself as long as he controlled his soul power appropriately. He could stop his experiment the last time he attempted it inside his body, so he should have no problems outside his body. Huo Yuhao assured himself before he immediately started his experiment. Huo Yuhao raised his right hand, and a thread of soul power gradually appeared. The mysterious heaven technique's soul power was presented as a faint white color. This was his purest soul power, because it didn't interact with either of his martial souls. The biggest difference between soul masters with twin martial souls and those with only one was that when soul masters with twin martial souls switched between their martial souls, their soul power would swiftly fuse with that martial soul. Huo Yuhao's spiritual power was sufficiently strong at this point that he could even use both of his martial souls at the same time under certain circumstances. Using both martial souls at the same time meant fusing one distinct part of his soul power with his respective martial souls at the same time. He couldn't do it for a prolonged period of time, and could only do it once or twice before he had to choose one martial soul. However, this method undoubtedly enabled him to connect his two martial souls more perfectly in an actual battle, and if this connection was utilized appropriately, it would be no different from using both martial souls at the same time. Huo Yuhao had only just mastered this method. It was a pity that his newfound ability was far from sufficient against an ultimate Doluo like Yi Shishui. He didn't even have a chance to use it. The mysterious heaven technique's pure soul power began to rotate in Huo Yuhao's palm. To ensure his safety, Huo Yuhao only used half the soul power that he had used when he was experimenting inside his body. Milky white soul power continued to rotate, and gradually became like a whirlpool. It was like a ball of milky white liquid, and it seemed very strange and unique. Huo Yuhao allowed it to start its rotations, before he gradually began to compress the milky white soul power while it rotated. He was very careful with his movements, and he made the compression process as balanced as possible. Doing so would hopefully avoid the phenomenon that had occurred the last time, where some parts solidified, while other parts remained in liquid form. Since he had decided to do this, he would have to do it as perfectly as possible. Only then would he achieve the best results. Milky white light shone faintly. Huo Yuhao concentrated on his task, and the white whirlpool's volume quickly became smaller under his manipulation. It didn't take long before it was half its original size. Huo Yuhao was especially meticulous in controlling the whirlpool this time, so it didn't show any signs of solidifying. It only became a lot thicker, and rotating it seemed to become increasingly harder. Huo Yuhao used even more spiritual power. With his prior experience, he immediately raised his spiritual power, while he made sure he was even more careful with his manipulation. The small white whirlpool became increasingly small, while the milky white hues became increasingly withdrawn as the thick liquid-like state began to solidify. It started to spin faster and faster under Huo Yuhao's control. Huo Yuhao remembered very clearly that every single existence that resembled black holes in the beast god's body were rotating at a speed that was almost indiscernible to the naked eye. Their rotation speeds were evidently important to utilizing spatial power. He didn't know the trick to that yet, so he had to experiment according to what he could observe. The whirlpool began to rotate even faster while it became even smaller, and it slowly began to solidify. Huo Yuhao could feel that he was onto something. The tiny whirlpool was gradually compressed to the size of a yellow bean. It had become completely solid at this point, and was shaped like a funnel. It continued rotating vigorously, while the soul power aura that it was emanating became increasingly weak. Does this mean that I can solidify my soul power and store it externally? That's just miraculous. If I can do that, what will happen if I place this highly compressed soul power into milk bottles? What kind of effect will I achieve? Milk bottles were useful, but the soul power they could contain was ultimately limited, and even milk bottles of higher classes were only equivalent to a soul sage soul power. Milk bottles weren't that important for higher-tier soul engineers. Perhaps I can devise a milk bottle of an even higher class, if I didn't have any distractions. Huo Yuhao was elated from his surprise discovery. He began to observe the milky funnel even more intricately, without overlooking any details. He continued to use more spiritual power, at the same time to compress the funnel, and so that he could keep it rotating. The yellow bean gradually became the size of a green bean. Huo Yuhao could feel that his soul power was being compressed almost to its maximum level, while its rotation speed seemed to have reached a limit as well. It would be difficult for his spiritual power to make it spin even faster. But its volume hasn't changed qualitatively. No matter how I look at it, it's just a small object that's spinning continuously. How did this happen? When it was inside my body previously, I hadn't compressed it to such a level, and it had already begun absorbing my soul power. Right, it has to continuously absorb soul power. Huo Yuhao's eyes lit up. He carefully released a little more soul power indeed. The solid funnel that was spinning furiously sensed Huo Yuhao's soul power, and seems to quiver subtly before a powerful gravitational force immediately emerged from it and swallowed the soul power that Huo Yuhao had released. The tiny funnel began to spin even faster, after swallowing that bit of soul power. Furthermore, the gravitational force that it produced began to strengthen, and Huo Yuhao could clearly feel that the little thing was starting to consume the origin energy of heaven and earth around it as well. That wasn't all, this gravitational force was acting on his own body as well, as if it wanted to absorb even more of his soul power. This process was just so strange. Huo Yuhao was very excited at this point, and he immediately released another thread of soul power for the funnel to absorb, as he closely monitored the funnel's transformations. The tiny funnel began to spin even faster after it consumed that soul power, and was now spinning at a speed that was so quick that Huo Yuhao could barely see what state it was in. More importantly, the funnel no longer needed Huo Yuhao's spiritual power to control it after it absorbed his soul power. It could now maintain its high rotation speed on its own. At the same time, it began to absorb the origin energy around it more quickly. Is it strengthening itself on its own? Have I done it? 15 minutes had gone by since Huo Yuhao had released this thing, and more strange and mystical phenomena gradually began to appear on it. Huo Yuhao's mind was steady and calm. He didn't continue releasing soul power into the funnel under such circumstances. Instead, he focused on closely observing how the funnel transformed after absorbing more of the origin energy of heaven and earth. The funnel's volume had evidently increased after absorbing his soul power twice. Its mass had increased to that of a yellow bean after both instances. The funnel's volume was increasing at a decreasing rate as it continued to absorb the origin energy around it. However, it was still increasing in size as it continued absorbing energy, and its rotation speed continued to increase as well. Huo Yuhao attempted to attach his spiritual power to the funnel. He could still do it in the beginning, but now his spiritual power was tossed back out very quickly. The funnel seemed to have created a strange magnetic field with its high-speed rotations. This magnetic field seemed to affect the space around it. That's it, this should be it. If its rotation speed increases to a certain level, and if the funnel itself becomes sufficiently strong, perhaps it will become like the soul power inside the beast god's body. But how am I to store this inside my own body? If I can't store it, then won't everything be meaningless? Huo Yuhao wasn't worried. He just sat on his bed with his legs crossed, as he used his spiritual power to observe the funnel's state. This little thing was continuing to spin faster and faster, and was consuming energy at a continuously faster rate. After an hour, its volume had increased by another 30%. Huo Yuhao discovered upon closer inspection that the spatial undulations around it weren't obvious, as if this phenomenon was because the funnel itself was far from strong enough. However, in terms of volume, the funnel seemed similar to those black holes when the beast god was using his soul power. However, even if that was the case, Huo Yuhao could already feel that this little thing was very dangerous. It was like a storeroom full of gunpowder that could be ignited at any time, and if anything collided with it, the soul power that was rotating at high speed could become unstable, and would definitely explode. Unfortunately, he was inside an army camp, so he couldn't test how it would look like after it exploded. He would have to find another place for that. Huo Yuhao channeled his spiritual power with that thought and enveloped this funnel from the outside as he began to attempt to gradually reduce its speed. This circumstance was different from when the soul power was inside his body. This time, perhaps because the funnel was simply spinning too quickly, he ran into a small problem as he tried to control it. Huo Yuhao's spiritual power was just starting to interact with it when the funnel immediately displayed signs of instability, as if it were instantly about to explode. Huo Yuhao hurriedly reduced the amount of pressure he was putting on it with his spiritual power before the tiny funnel stabilized once more. However, that wasn't enough to stump Huo Yuhao. First, he used a spiritual barrier to cut off the funnel's connection to the outside world so that it could no longer absorb the origin energy around it to strengthen itself, before he gradually reduced its rotation speed so that it would gradually slow down in its stabilized state. He took 15 minutes to make this solid-state soul power stop spinning completely. The funnel finally presented itself in a conical shape in his hands, while the compressed soul power began to dissipate swiftly, because it was no longer spinning as Huo Yuhao reabsorbed it into his body. This process continued for about 2 hours. Huo Yuhao still hadn't discovered the trick after close inspection, but at least he had managed to finish his experiment. Perhaps this introductory experiment will give me even more unexpected surprises. What I need now is to make more observations. I need to go outside. Huo Yuhao exited his tent, and glanced toward somewhere not far from him, the tent that belonged to Tang Wutong. He gradually activated his martial soul and used imitation. His passageways still felt a little painful, but there wasn't a problem if he didn't forcefully channel a lot of soul power. He didn't want to give up on such a fantastic opportunity many times. Inspiration was but something that occurred over an instant, and perhaps he would never find the same inspiration again if he missed it. Therefore, Huo Yuhao didn't hesitate for too long. He immediately concealed himself through imitation and snuck out of the camp. The Star Luo Empire's camp didn't have that many surveillance soul tools. With his ability and deliberate intentions, he quickly managed to get out. Huo Yuhao accelerated after leaving the army camp, though he only used less than 30% of his soul power as he raced into the distance. His body's physical state was a little better than he had imagined. There wasn't too much of a burden on his body as long as he suppressed his soul power to a certain level, and this was undoubtedly a beneficial result for him. He went more than 10 kilometers away from the camp before he slowed down. He found a small hill and went behind it, and then used his spiritual power to sense if there was anybody around him before he began his experiment once more. With his previous experience, Huo Yuhao directly released even more soul power than before this time, and began to rotate and compress it. He took half the time that he did before, and the soul power that he had released took the shape of a solid funnel. He was no longer inside the army camp. There was nobody else around him, and he wasn't afraid of this thing exploding anymore. The funnel hovered in mid-air. Its rotation speed was increasing very quickly, as Huo Yuhao continued infusing soul power into it, and it began to absorb the origin energy of heaven and earth around it crazily. It didn't take long before the solid funnel became the size of a fist. White lightning streaks were faintly visible around it, and the space around it also began to contort. Huo Yuhao continued to observe closely as he reduced the amount of soul power that he released. This fist-sized solid funnel had a gravitational force that was much stronger than the first one, and even if he reduced the amount of soul power that he released, this thing would still automatically absorb his soul power. Huo Yuhao could clearly feel that his soul power was even flowing out from his pores to fuse with the funnel, and all the origin energy, within 1,000 square meters around him, was being aggregated at lightning speed. The funnel's volume and rotation speed were also increasing continuously. What kind of law does this follow? Huo Yuhao wasn't sure, but he understood that the more soul power this funnel contained, the closer it came to the special characteristics of the beast god's soul power. Of course, this was only one of the black holes inside Di Qian's internal soul power. Huo Yuhao stopped releasing soul power as he gradually moved backwards to distance himself from the funnel. However, he quickly realized to his surprise that there seemed to be some kind of unknown pulling force coming from his body. As the funnel actually shifted along with him, it was chasing him. Are you kidding me? Huo Yuhao wasn't confident of making it stop, as it had become so big. He was astonished, and couldn't be bothered with the fact that his passageways hadn't recovered completely. Light flashed around his body as he used instant teleportation, and he used it at its maximum range. Huo Yuhao disappeared 100 meters away with a flash. The funnel quivered faintly, and it seemed to have lost its target, and finally stopped chasing him. Huo Yuhao finally heaved a sigh as he continued shifting backwards. He placed 200 meters between the funnel and himself, before he used spiritual detection to scrutinize its state. This video will end here.